As global markets grapple with the ripple effects of escalating tariffs, tech industry warnings and shifting investor sentiments, critical questions now are rising about the future of economic stability and growth. Let's head to Adelaide now. We are joined by David Scutt from StoneX. Always good to talk. How do you interpret the Fed Reserve Chair Jerome Powell's remarks in Chicago? He said a lot.
G'day, Aaron. Great to be back. And he did say a lot, but he didn't say what the markets were looking for. And I'm a little bit surprised by the market reaction, I've got to say. There's this belief that the Fed will come right in like a white knight to go and say things when there's even a very scary of volatility. Now, we've seen some pretty wild moves in markets over the course of the past month or so, but nothing that's incredibly dysfunctional apart from one day in the Treasury market. And so he just sat back and said, well, we think there's going to be an inflationary pulse coming through from tariffs. We haven't made any more progress in achieving our inflation mandate. And so he's going to sit back and relax. And the markets didn't like that one iota.
Yeah, well, markets obviously want to see some certainty and they're looking for the Fed to give them that certainty, aren't they? It's interesting because he spoke about unemployment rising. He spoke about the impacts that the US economy will see in terms of slowing down once consumers start to have to pay higher prices for these tariffs. Let's hear from the man himself, a man who doesn't usually make a joke, but he decided to kick off with this one.
As that great Chicagoan Ferris Bueller once noted, life moves pretty fast. For the time being, we are well positioned to wait for greater clarity before considering any adjustments to our policy stance. We continue to analyze the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. We understand that elevated levels of unemployment or inflation can be damaging and painful for communities, families, and businesses. We will continue to do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals.
Now, I once asked a former boss of mine, as a young journalist as I was in the business world, why are these Fed Reserve chairs? Why do they speak in a monotone? Why do they never give us anything? Why is it so boring? I'd have to go cover these events and try not to fall asleep. And that person said to me, well, because if they show any emotion, it can literally change the markets. And despite that monotonal pause, tech stocks did not like what they heard.
Yes, there's this belief that the Fed's going to be, becoming, and they talk about the Fed put. He was actually asked about this Fed put idea in the Q&A section. So when the markets get bad enough that they'll come and go and rescue them. And basically what he said is no. We all know that that's a lie. At some point, if the things get very, very dysfunctional, the Fed will go and move in aggressively, as we've seen during other crisis periods. But the thing is that right now, despite the volatility we're seeing, despite the economic uncertainty, the Fed is not in a rush to go and do that. And I think that's what the markets didn't like. Although it was a very adult conversation and very adult-like remarks from Powell, which was very refreshing, I've got to say, considering some of the things we've heard recently.
Yeah, it's been a blockbuster time for crazy comments. Nvidia, ASML as well, highlighting potential impacts from tariffs. How do you see these as isolated concerns, or I guess are they broader challenges now facing the tech sector? Because Nvidia's been the market darling over the past year. They've been leading the AI race. DeepSeek comes along, but now there are concerns about it's kind of double-sided, right? It's really interesting. You've got the one side where the US government doesn't want Nvidia selling chips to the Chinese because look what happened with DeepSeek and what that did to the markets. On the other side, the markets want Nvidia to be able to sell to the Chinese.
Exactly, and literally a couple of minutes ago, I just saw a headline flash across where the White House is now going to investigate whether DeepSeek used those H20 chips to go and come up with that platform. So clearly there's a lot of water still to go under the bridge there. And you're right, but more broadly, it's not just talking about the US chip makers, but TMNC, ASML last night warned about uncertainty really starting to impact demand for chips and chip making services. So we're getting a bit of a sense here that, and I don't think it's just from the chip sector in particular, I think it's more broadly anyone and any company with a really wide-ranging global trade scope is going to be impacted by this uncertainty right now. So I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg about what's going to be coming down the pipeline. Any companies with global exposure, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to go and offer any firm guidance. And if it is going to be any guidance, it's probably going to be lower.
Now let's talk about the recent trends about the US dollar, right? Because its role as a global safe haven must be under threat. We thought it would be BRICS as they were all joining together and Donald Trump as soon as he became president, was very outspoken about BRICS and its threat to the US dollar. But it seems now the biggest threat to the US dollar could be Trump himself.
That's right, and the markets are speaking. It's been really pronounced, the sell-off in the dollar. Pretty much this week in particular, it's been very, very strong, and that followed that tit for tat with China, and there's really abrupt changes again when it comes to tariff policy. But you could just see it when it comes to the safe haven currencies in particular. The Swiss franc has been absolutely rocketing higher. We've seen the Japanese yen doing very well, and the euro, surprisingly enough, is also being very, very big, alongside the likes of gold, which we know last night and this morning actually here in Asia has hit record highs. The dollar, its traditional role in markets like this, in circumstances like this, would be to go and strengthen rapidly. But right now it's doing the exact opposite. And how that goes and changes, well, I dare say it would have to be a very big about face when it comes to tariff policy and how the United States is perceived by other nations around the world.
Let's talk about Australia now as well. We've seen the latest jobs report indicating resilience in Australia's employment sector. What are the key takeaways? And I always find jobs reports, as well as the unemployment rate, pretty tricky, as in very hard to be able to calculate, and also hard to calculate those who just simply have given up looking for work.
Yes, it's really, really difficult. The ABS survey will be out later today, 11:30 on the eastern coast. And what we saw last month was this dramatic decline in unemployment led by full-time employment, and that caused a lot of angst. But as you mentioned, the report itself, when it comes to underutilisation, underemployment, unemployment, was all very solid still. And the RBA was at pains to go and focus on that when they put out their monetary policy statement about a month or so ago. So today, what we're looking for is basically a reversal. So that volatility continues with a big 40,000 increase coming through, most likely in full-time employment. The key area to watch is the unemployment rate, because that's what the RBA cares about. And then I'd also go, it gets a bit wonkish when it comes to economics of it, but also keep a look on the underutilisation rate, because they are two very closely watched areas that the RBA is focusing on. So if you're an investor, if you're a trader, they are the ones to go and react to, not the actual change in the jobs numbers. Interesting.
Did you watch the debate on the ABC?
I've honestly switched off because it's been pretty disheartening. There's no reform, no meaningful changes to the outlook for Australia, all to do with very similar demand side policies when it comes to housing in particular. No, mate, I didn't watch it. And I think a lot of Australians are switched off already.
It's actually really hard to watch, right? You watch the election and you want to believe in democracy, and we do. But the challenge is that both parties don't seem to be capable of answering the questions at the moment. And even watching the housing debate, as a first home buyer myself and many others that I know, no one is listening, because how many times have we heard governments think about state budgets, federal budgets, constantly making promises to fix it, and it just doesn't get fixed? At what stage do you turn off?
At some stage, well, I think the electorate, a lot of people have already done that, and just there's no real choice between a lot of the policies, one way or the other. They all kind of lead to the same path. What happens in the future? Look, this is probably going a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but what I suspect we might go and see is that if we get to the point where the two major parties lose so much of their base that we have a hodgepodge, not only in the Senate, but the House of Reps, that might be the final tipping point where we can go and see some real reforms coming through. But rightly, as some commentators have pointed out as well, all both major parties are doing right now is trying to go and appease the largest cohort in the electorate. And so they're trying to go and make no major changes. Unfortunately, it doesn't make for very good debate, doesn't make for very good policy, will leave us in a weaker spot in the future. But that, unfortunately, is the reality that we're dealing with right now. And there's not a big appetite for reform out there, at least amongst the majority of the other populace.
Yes, well, for those of the viewers out there who thought they could get away from escaping it, you cannot. Here they are. There they were. There's the debate leaders of the two of them. Now, when you see these two, what's the first thing that comes to mind, David?
Small target. Just, not trying to go and do anything out of the ordinary, trying to go and get through as limited damage whatsoever, make themselves ability to go and be very, very quiet, get the key points across, but not inspiring in the slightest.
Yeah, I watched about half of the debate. It's all I could tolerate until I started to think this is the same thing over and over. And I suppose it comes down to that question, are these the two best leaders that can be put forward by their party? And I guess, where are we at? Interesting comments that came from one of the main commentators in the Australian newspaper, essentially suggesting that Peter Dutton is quite hard to campaign with for the Liberal Party and is being pushed by supporters in the media as well, and whether that will, I guess, if he loses, and it seems like he's on track to, there'll be a chance for him to have a look at that, for the party to really question whether someone like Peter Dutton can actually win and whether it needs to be more of a centrist. What are your views on that?
Yeah, look, all I can do is what the polls at the moment, and just going on past records and past history, if he doesn't manage to go and pull off this victory, there's every likelihood there'll be a change in leadership. How that goes about, look, we're probably putting the cart before the horse here, but we'll see where it plays out. But I'll be very surprised if he stayed on as opposition leader if he were to go and lose. It was an environment where, coming into this election campaign, it would have been very, very easy to go and land some pretty big blows on Labor. There's been not a lot of major reforms passed. There's been a lot of problems created for the communities when it comes to cost of living, and that's not out of the ordinary. That is looking at what the actual data is saying. It's not a feel. And the inability to go and land a punch has been very, very surprising, and a little bit disappointed when it comes to the ability to go and actually have moved the debate on and do better for Australia. At this election so far, we have not seen anything like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It will be interesting to see what happens the next 3 years as well, no matter who wins. David Scutt, appreciate your time here on Ticker. Thank you.
Always great to be here. Take care.